It's now my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker this morning, Mr. John Lawler, the CEO of the Australian Crime Commission. John's had an impressive law enforcement career spanning nearly 30 years. He served for 29 years with the Australian Federal Police and was appointed as Deputy Commissioner of the AFP in July 2004. During his career, he's taken on a range of roles at local, national, international levels in areas such as community policing, investigations, protection, intelligence, international operations and executive services. As CEO of the Crime Commission, John's actively worked to promote collaboration and engage with government, law enforcement and private sector partners in the fight against organised crime. He's been awarded an Australia Day Medallion, the Australian Police Medal, Australia's highest law enforcement award, and the National Medal and Class for his 25 years of diligent service. He's also on the AIC Board of Management as well as one of the Commonwealth representatives, so you'll see we've stacked the program today with a very pro-AIC set of speakers. His presentation today will focus on the challenges that confront law enforcement in an environment with an increasing number of dimensions and outline the opportunities for law enforcement to evolve and to gain new capabilities in combating organised crime into the future. I'd call on John Lawler to give his presentation.
Well, thanks very much, Adam, for the opportunity to be here at the conference this morning. I firstly just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which the conference takes place, and secondly to make an apology insofar as that I was not present at the conference yesterday. I was, as with others, preoccupied with Senate estimates, and let me tell you after that I would have much preferred to have been at the conference. But that having been said, it's great to be amongst friends. It's great to be amongst representatives across the broad spectrum of law enforcement and national security, both at a state level and a Commonwealth level, across the various disciplines, including local police, police involved in serious and organised crime, federal agencies, broader Commonwealth government agencies, indeed former senior police officers I've seen here. We've also represented by our international colleagues, some of which spoke at the conference yesterday, and academia. And you'll see that we also have representatives of the Fourth Estate here at this conference. And as I attended the conference this morning, somebody said one of the best things about this conference is that it was networking nirvana. And I think that probably captures what conferences like this are all about. I would like to make one special mention of Commissioner Mal Hyde, who's a member of the Australian Crime Commission Board and he's here today. Mal, great to see you here representing senior law enforcement. Mal's been a strong supporter of mine personally, a strong supporter of the fight against organised crime in South Australia, and a strong advocate for a national response to organised crime. I'd like to start off by just drawing the audience attention to the title of the presentation here this morning, The Fifth Estate, Organised Crime Goes Virtual. And we've quite deliberately in the ACC decided to focus on the Fifth Estate and the issue of going virtual. Lots of things we could talk about in relation to organised crime, but we think they're two important components. Indeed, with the conference here today, it's useful to reflect back for just a minute or two as to whether we could have reasonably expected to have a conference like this involving this wide disparity of agencies in Australia. A few decades ago, we were still very much in the early days of building our profile on organised crime and understanding how it impacts in this great country of ours, Australia. Back then, we as a law enforcement community were just starting to explore the nexus between crime groups. Now we know that the face of organised crime in Australia, as everywhere, is truly transnational, with few embedded ethnic or social commonalities, and with groups now forming more loose affiliations to target specific crime markets. 10 years ago, we saw the emerging trend involving deliberate misuse of identity as an underlying methodology of organised criminality. Now, we know that identity fraud is the fastest growing crime in Australia, and that it's a common element of organised criminality. A decade ago, we were just building our picture of understanding money laundering typologies. Today, we are firmly focused on tackling money laundering, knowing that it fuels virtually every organised criminal activity. And back then, we were beginning to gain better insights into technology-related crime. Now, we understand that cybercrime, like money laundering, is a fundamental mechanism employed by serious criminals to further their enterprise and reap the benefits of the harm that they inflict. While our understanding of organised crime is evolving, I would hasten to add that it is not, and arguably cannot be, definitive, because organised crime itself is not definitive. It is an ever-evolving entity, and I'll be speaking more on that shortly. Of course, a decade ago, the Australian Crime Commission didn't exist. At that time, decision-makers sought new ways of tackling entrenched and serious organised crime. We needed to improve our strategic understanding of organised crime and develop innovative and effective ways of tackling it. The scale of change seemed immense. We needed to build a thorough profile of organised crime, but importantly, cast an eye for the future. We also needed to put an end to intelligence gaps and a lack of coordinated law enforcement response that the serious and organised criminals were exploiting. And we needed to work closely, cross-jurisdictionally and transnationally. And when faced with the size and the scope of organised crime, we needed to focus our efforts, focus our resources to maximum effect. I'll discuss some of the mechanisms we employ to meet those goals in a moment. But firstly, I thought I'd explain, for those of you who don't know, and before it was explained to me, I was amongst that cadre as well, what we mean by the fifth estate. It's accepted that estates refer to the four institutional authorities that include the clergy, the nobility, the commoners, made up of the legislature, the executive and the judicial branches of government, and, as I mentioned earlier, the fourth estate, the press. The fifth estate is a label that's been applied to a myriad of unrelated groups that range from traditional trade unions to political pundits to the poor to bloggers. But the fifth estate I'm referring to today is serious and organised crime. Now, some of you might, in the audience, might be thinking, well, Mr. Lawler, that's very clever. But in actual fact, that thought's not new. Many of you would be aware that there was an academic, Donald Cressy's landmark 1969 description of organised crime as the fifth estate. And 10 years later, an American lawyer and writer, August Bouquet, added to Cressy's argument that organised crime's sheer size, its power, its affluence, its influence, its own codes and rules, its ability to impact on individuals, to injure and even enslave, made it truly the fifth estate. As Bouquet put it, and let me quote, and it's interesting just to listen to these words, you know, in the late 70s around the description of organised crime. And he said this: organised crime is big business. In the United States, it rivals the auto industry in its size and affluence. It has power to be reckoned with. It abuses constitutional rights daily, yet it has managed to escape the wrath of reformers. It is in essence a de facto government with its own private army and system of laws. Among its allies are men of power and wealth. It rules a far-flung empire that stretches both domestically and internationally. It is a conglomerate of numerous groups from numerous ethnic and racial backgrounds. He went on to call it an American tragedy, but the words can equally apply on a global scale. We know, for instance, that the profits of Mexican drug cartels alone rival the GDP of some of the world's smaller nations. And this is what we face today. No matter which country we're from, the reality is that organised crime is a transnational beast of immense size. Its growth reflects that of a more globalised world. This is a world where more people are on the move than ever before. Let me quote you some statistics here that put all of this into sharp relief and context. Between 1960 and 2000, the total number of people immigrating worldwide doubled from 76 million to 159 million. It's a world where more goods are moving between countries. Between 1950 and 2000, half a century, 50 years, world trade grew 17-fold to $13 trillion. In the same period, world GDP increased fourfold to 30 trillion. It is a world where more money is being moved. On the 1st of September this year, the Bank of International Settlements released its triennial survey of global foreign exchange markets, showing the turnaround was $4 trillion a day. The numbers are staggering. 20 years ago, that figure was $620 billion, an increase of just on 550%. And organised crime has exploited to the fullest extent this new world, where borders are more porous and more open. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime report, released on the 17th of June this year, confirms that. I know we've got Gary Lewis here representing the UNODC, and if I can recommend to you the UNODC report of 17 June and the preface to that report by Antonio Maria Costa as a quick snapshot, good easy read of what we're confronting in the organised crime environment, please let me do so.